And so before we get started, just please make sure that your microphone is muted. It's been nice to chat with people as we've been getting going this morning, but we just want to make sure that we don't have any background noise so everybody can hear well. So good morning and welcome to the annual member meeting. Certainly it looks a bit different, but you know, as I mentioned, it's nice that we've got people joining us from all over the country because we are doing it this way. I'm Carol Abrahamson, the Executive Director, and I speak for our whole team when I say that we are so glad that you could join us this morning. I wondered if you, I'm sorry. I wondered if you had a chance to try the conservation coffee cake. I did, thought it was delicious, and can't wait to have another piece right after our meeting. So I invite you now to sit back and relax with your favorite morning beverage and enjoy a brief update of your conservancy, of the lands that you've helped to protect, and a presentation on a resilience thinking in the Northwest area by Steve and Susan Carpenter. So it was a year ago this month, actually, that our lives drastically changed, both personally and professionally. Mississippi Valley Conservancy staff moved from our La Crosse office to our home office. We set up computers and printers in dining rooms, porches, bedrooms, anywhere that we could make it work. So I'd like to introduce the team, and I like to say it's our team from A to Z. Starting out with A, we have Abby Church. You all know her, our Conservation Director. Of course, myself, Carol Abrahamson, the Executive Director. One of our newer members, Chris Kirkpatrick, who is our Conservation Specialist. Kristen Zumo, our Stewardship Associate. Levi Plath, our Land Manager. Nancy Larson, the Financial and Operations Manager. Sarah Bratnober, our Communications Director. Another new member to the team, Sienna Molefield, our Restoration Coordinator. And bringing up the rear with the Z is Zach Milbrand, our Stewardship Coordinator. So once we set these offices up in our homes, we carried on, protecting more land for our feathered, furred, and finned friends, places that support clean air and water, the places that everything from the smallest insect to the biggest deer needs to find food and shelter. We've had to do it differently, but we've continued to care for the land by restoring the places all things need to live, cutting cedars to restore bluff prairies, pulling garlic mustard, and cutting buckthorn to make space for native plants to thrive, and prairie flower seeds, but seeds of hope for a resilient future, restoring places that will become essential to the wildlife as our climate changes. And because your support didn't waver, we've continued to provide safe places for people to go, places to relax and find peace, safe places for families to play and explore together. And I wondered now, where were your favorite places to walk and relax this past year? And what did that place mean to you? You can let us know in the chat box. We'd love to hear of the places that you've been and what they meant to you in this past year. In the first few months of the pandemic, we received many notes of encouragement, such as these. My daughter and I were making a list of things to do in her time off. Hiking at the Conservancy lands is high on our list of things that we can still do. I'm so thankful, especially at this time, that we have these wonderful places to get outside and enjoy nature. I find strength walking the bluffs every day. The Conservancy has an enduring mission, which will only gain more importance and appreciation on the other side of this crisis. I'm really enjoying exposing my friends to trails while social distancing, of course, and feeling their new enthusiasm and relief from the stressors of our time. Thanks for all that the Conservancy does to protect our beautiful backyard. We learned very quickly how important saving our special places is. The work that you support every day means that people have places to hike, enjoy nature, find inner and outer strength when times are tough, and to relax from the stressors that surround us. Thank you for making this work possible with your membership support, your volunteerism, and your conservation leadership by protecting the land with your conservation easement and preventing future development. I want to very quickly introduce a new program that we are going to roll out this spring called Naturehood Connections. This program is funded by a grant from the La Crosse Community Foundation. The project will fund trail improvements and better signage at a number of our La Crosse area preserves. If you're interested in learning more about and helping with land restoration, we will be offering some training along with toolkits that you can check out from our office and use them whenever you have time to do the work. We'll also provide some exploration kits for the kids, so when they tire of helping mom and dad, they can explore and learn more about nature. Watch for more information about this new program coming later this spring. Our climate change work group continues to meet. Most recently, we've identified high priority actions to be taken, which include following the ever-evolving science on climate change, encouraging landowners to consider carbon sequestration in their forest management plans, and to plant perennial cover on their fields, including pollinator plantings. And where feasible, we encourage landowners and everyone to generate carbon-free electricity and decrease their use of fossil fuels. We will have a new tab on our website all about climate change, including our comprehensive strategy and actions that you can take to make a difference this spring. As always, we welcome your ideas and your interest in this work. And if you are interested in joining our climate change working group, please let me know. We'd love to have you join us and share your thoughts. So if you've been attending these member meetings over the past 7 years, you have undoubtedly noticed that we've grown a bit. We continue to strive to meet the needs of our communities and the places we all love and want to protect. There are new challenges around every corner, from climate change to the need to save habitats and farmlands. As we've been creating a vision for the next 10 years, we've come to realize we'll need to scale up our work to meet the needs we have now and well into the future. So how are we going to do this? Well, one way toward growth and stability is through gifts left to the Conservancy in a will. In 2020, we received our first bequest of land from a couple who wanted to make sure their land was a gift for all to enjoy. We also received our first financial gift left by a longtime supporter in her will. Gifts like these are extremely important and allow for future planning and growth. In order to encourage others to consider a gift to Mississippi Valley Conservancy in their will or estate plan, two generous couples have donated a total of $30,000 as a challenge to others to do the same. If you let me know that you are leaving a gift to the future of land protection, $1,000 will be released from this bequest challenge fund into our operating budget right away. And your bequest will be a fund for the future. If you'd like more information or to talk about this challenge, please contact me and we can have a chat. Thank you for coming this morning and for caring every single day. And now I'm going to introduce our Conservation Director, Abby Church, and she is going to tell you about the many special places that you have helped to protect over this past year.
Good morning, and thank you, Carol. We've had a busy year since the member meeting last spring. All of you have supported the conservation of exemplary habitats, stunning views, rare species, soils, water, and biodiversity. And hopefully my screen is now showing for everybody.
Not quite yet.
No, not quite yet.
It's coming, Abby. It's coming.
It's trying really hard. So that-
You're so far away. For those of you who don't know it, Abby's actually in Nebraska visiting family, but she was so kind to share her story with us today.
There we go.
All right. So acres, all of you have protected to date are 21,672 acres. Since last spring's member meeting, we've protected 703 acres. And on this map, all of the yellow stars are the conservation easements. All of the blue stars are our nature preserves available to the public. And the bigger gold stars are the 7 new projects that we've completed. And while I have the map up, I'd like to bring your attention to Grant County. This is our snow bottom priority area. If you can see my cursor, it's right there along the eastern boundary. And one of these yellow stars is the land that Steve and Susan Carpenter protected with us. And you'll hear more about that shortly. We are so thankful to those people who have chosen to leave a legacy in the form of a conservation easement to us, with us, privately protecting land where wildlife have an oasis, where they know that they can thrive in perpetuity, water is cleansed, soils are protected. Thank you to Chris and Joyce Barlow, who protected 165 acres with us in Monroe County. This is a site that they have cared for since 1988, adjacent to Fort McCoy. This property is within a prioritized corridor for the federally endangered Karner blue butterfly. It protects forests, sand prairie, springs, seeps, ponds, and the headwaters of Tar Creek. So thank you to Chris and Joyce. We are thankful to Kurt and Joan Peterson, who are with us today, for their vision of protecting forested habitat, which is home to nesting populations of the state-threatened cerulean warbler. Their land provides 40 acres of forested habitat, another site with springs, seeps, sedge meadows, and functional floodplain. Sites like this that have perennial vegetation slow and filter floodwaters as climate change brings more dramatic weather events. We need sites like the Petersons to continue to absorb and filter floodwaters into the future as they have historically. Thank you to Kurt and Joan Peterson. Farther down the Kickapoo River watershed, thank you to Ellen Brooks and David Hackett for their 37-acre conservation easement in Crawford County, just outside of Gaze Mills. Contiguous tracts of habitat are mandatory to provide for wildlife resiliency and climate change. And this site shares a boundary with the DNR's Kickapoo River Wildlife Area, which also shares a couple of boundaries with other conservancy easement protected properties within our Kickapoo River priority area for one big contiguous protected corridor of some 2,300 acres of protected land. Thank you to Ellen and David for that project. Thank you to David and Betty Van Dyke for their vision of farmland preservation, which remains a key part of Wisconsin's rural heritage, our local economy, and a focus of the Conservancy's mission. This 114-acre property in Vernon County has diverse prairie strips, which you can see here in the background, which are planted along the contour to slow and filter runoff and provide habitat for all of our local pollinators. Their woods and pond further support area wildlife, and we're thankful to David and Betty for protecting their land with us. Continuing the tradition of farmland preservation, thank you to Tom and Sharon Shuret, who are with us today on the Zoom. And they did a conservation easement amendment. They purchased 40 acres adjacent to their farm that was already protected with an easement, and we amended it to include the adjacent acreage. This is their third land protection project with us for a total of 271 acres just across the road from the internationally known Westby ski jump. Their land conserves working farmland, pasture, and a stretch of Timber Coulee Creek. They've partnered with the Westby schools to provide conservation learning opportunities to students. and most recently undertook an impressive black locust control project, removing hundreds of invasive trees and repurposing them in their new life as fence posts. Thank you to Tom and Sharon for conserving your third project with us. And in addition to the wildlife, soil conservation, and watershed protection of the 55-acre conservation easement conveyed by Will and Peg Auger in La Crosse County, we are conserving another feature of Wisconsin's landscape, archaeology, that legacy of the indigenous communities that came before. This exceptionally scenic site is right along the Black River within our Black River priority area. And this project ensures that future paddlers and anglers on the Black River will continue to enjoy those scenic wooded blufflands. And you may have noticed a theme of water quality conservation this year. We have another headwaters site. Thank you to Diane and Charlie Kniff for your 88-acre conservation easement in Monroe County. Yet another site with seeps, springs, and this one is the headwaters and tributary to Big Creek, a Class 1 trout stream. This is a site with a population of rare 3 birds, orchid, butternut trees, and wildlife, including ruffed grouse, bobcats, and even a fisher. So these 7 conservation easements that we've completed since last year's member meeting join the ranks of over 2 decades and 120 landowners who have protected land with us, including many of you who have joined us on the Zoom call this morning, including Sarah Bentley, Joel Lazinger, Joan Schmidt, Jim and Joyce Tchaikovsky, George and Carmine Johnston, Maggie Jones, David Linton, Jim and Rose Syme, Gracie Homan, Barb and Don Frank, and so many others. We could not achieve our mission without all of you. In addition to the conservation easements, we have lands that we have acquired that become nature preserves open to the public. This provides everyone with the opportunities to enjoy the gifts that nature bestows, something that so many people desperately need right now. Just by being available for hiking, bird watching, or other nature-based activities, these properties provide stability during this time of unease and reminders of our own resilience. So thank you to an anonymous conservation buyer who enabled us to acquire the 108-acre nature preserve adjacent to the DNR's Limery Ridge Savannah State Natural Area in Crawford County. This site is just north of Prairie du Chien and brings the total acreage of the site to 327 acres. The scenic blufflands of this property provide a backdrop to travelers on the newly designated National Scenic Byway and All-American Road, also known as State Highway 35. It provides oak forest, and this is within the Mississippi River Migratory Flyway. It's a really key stopover site during migration and also a really key nesting site for forest nesting birds. The birds are probably scoping it out as we speak for nesting potential for this spring, and the site will continue to provide that nesting habitat in perpetuity. This preservation project also conserves the heritage of Indigenous communities through the protection of a 1,000-plus-year-old ridgetop effigy mound overlooking the Mississippi River Valley. So we hope you'll all have a chance to check this new property out. And as you can see, yet another site with springs, seeps, a waterfall, and drainage into the Mississippi River watershed. As Carol shared, we received our first bequest this year of land. We are so thankful to those who have passed on, but left a legacy in their wake. We are thankful to the late Dean and Phyllis Dempsey. Thanks to their foresight, we have made available to the local community 52 acres of floodplain forest, beaches, and a peninsula right at the confluence of the Black River, the La Crosse River, and the Mississippi River, adjacent to the 240,000-acre Upper Mississippi National Wildlife and Fish Refuge, all within Pool 8. Fishing, paddling, and other activities are now available for all to enjoy in perpetuity, and the site also conserves archaeological features. As people seek out a sense of place and a purpose in nature, we are so thankful to the vision of folks who chose to leave a legacy that people now and in the future can rely on. whether as a public nature preserve or private lands protected with conservation easements, parcel by parcel, acre by acre. You are all making these land protections possible. You are providing the voice for wildlife, keeping nature a prominent and valued part of Wisconsin's future. So that's what we've been up to, and we have another very busy year ahead of us. And I am really excited to introduce this morning's speaker. Steve and Susan Carpenter joined the ranks of landowners we worked with back in 2009 for the protection of their land along the Blue River in Grant County. And this site remains to this day the site that I point to of functional floodplain restoration, functional stream bank restoration, where in the floodwaters of 2019, the native prairie planting that they installed in their corridor along the river, the floodwaters came through and those prairie grasses laid right down. And they did exactly what they're supposed to do. They absorbed those floodwaters, they slowed it down, they collected the sediment, they absorbed the phosphorus and the nitrogen, keeping it from spreading farther down the watershed. And then as the floodwaters receded, those prairie grasses popped right back up in the ultimate display of resiliency. This site is an incredible property. They have spent, I don't even want to know, Steve and Susan, how many hundreds of hours you have spent on this property. And if there's any anglers with us today, there is a public fisheries easement along the Black River corridor on their property. And I hope you'll get a chance to check this site out. You will not be disappointed. So Steve is Emeritus Director and Professor at the Center for Limnology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he studies long-term change in Wisconsin's lakes and works with international colleagues on ecological, economic, and societal resilience to climate change, work that every day is increasingly more and more important. And Susan Carpenter is with us today and will help field questions and also talk about resiliency. In addition to her work as native plant gardener at the UW-Madison Arboretum, she's also active in bumblebee conservation and has documented new populations that were not previously known, not only on their site in Grant County of the federally endangered rusty-patched bumblebee. It was just designated endangered in 2017. But she's also documented on other conservancy protected sites. So now I will turn it over to Steve and Susan to share with us all some thoughts about thinking resiliency.
Thanks, Abby. I hope you can all hear me and see a picture of our land that Abby was just talking about. This is the land after the annual 100-year flood. We seem to have a 100-year flood every year now in Grant County. I'm going to define resilience and in a plain English way, and give you a few examples, and then hand it over to Susan, who's going to talk about what we have done on the ground and what many of you are doing and have done on the ground to improve the resilience of your land. Resilience is the ability of a region, of a place. Resilience is about a place, and it's the ability of that place and the people who live there to deal with change and continue to thrive. Resilience thinking is a process of building resilience to the outcome you want. I've shown the cover of a book by Brian Walker that summarizes the ideas that I'm going to talk about. And Brian synthesizes the last 30 years of work by the Resilience Network, an international network of scientists working to build the resilience of the climate. So it really boils down to three simple questions. What are we talking about? What is the place on Earth that we want to build resilience of? Second, what changes are coming? What do we think What do we think is coming that might challenge the resilience of those places? And finally, what would be a good outcome? What are we trying to do? It's really boils down to those three simple questions. So let's start with an example of where we all live. So I'm going to talk just for a moment here about the surface of the Earth. This is a view from the International Space Station. And we all live on the onion skin of Earth, a very thin layer of land down a couple of 100 feet to the aquifer, and above us a few miles to the atmosphere that contains the air we breathe and controls the climate that we live in. And scientists divide this into four things they call spheres. The atmosphere is the layer of air, the lithosphere is the layer of earth, the hydrosphere is the layer of water, and the biosphere is that living onion skin layer where we all live and has the land that we all work on. And it turns out that the health of the biosphere controls the health of all the other layers. So the biosphere is the key to the resilience of the whole thing. This slide shows the history of Earth. The vertical axis is temperature, change in temperature from a reference temperature that's very favorable for humans. The time scale goes from the end of the dinosaurs and rise of the mammals, which led to us, until the present time. And I'm not going to go through this in detail, although it's a fascinating diagram. Maybe you can see my cursor. Let's start with this yellow line here. That's an incredibly stable time in Earth's history. It's the last 12,000 years or so, extending to the present, which was just remarkably stable. And humans existed since about 3 million years ago over here, if you can see my cursor. Fully modern humans first migrated out of Africa about 80,000 years ago and populated Europe, Asia, and eventually the Americas and Australia. But a series of remarkable things happened in this relatively short 12,000 year period of time. Agriculture appeared quickly. After agriculture existed, it was possible to develop cities because you could surround the cities with agricultural land and grow food for the people who lived in the cities. So societies could become more complicated. And then just a few thousand years ago, the great civilizations emerged simultaneously everywhere. So the Cahokia in North America, the Mayan civilization of Central America, the Incas of South America, the great Chinese civilization, and the Greek civilization, and later its successor, the Roman civilization in Europe. All of those popped up at that at about that same time. So something was going on in the availability of energy and food to enable society to create civilizations. And now things are getting warmer. Since the industrial era, we have been warming the atmosphere, and currently there is great uncertainty as to where we're going. Many people are including Mississippi Valley Conservancy and all of us, are working hard to go to the purple band on the right. That purple band is taking us back to something like the Holocene. The trend, the business as usual trend, is to go into the red band, which will take us to something like the Eocene, which was before humans evolved, and probably not a place we want to go, the time when there was no ice on Earth. It's possible that our last minute panic to solve the problem will get us in the pale blue band, which takes us to the mid-Pliocene. And many scientists think we're headed for the mid-Pliocene. And for that reason, there's a tremendous amount of research on the mid-Pliocene and what it's going to be like if we go there. So this map shows the change in suitability for humans based on the climate people need to grow food and be able to live outdoors. The green is an improvement in suitability for humans, and the red is a loss. Our region is actually going to become more suitable for humans. So on average, we may think that the world has gotten better, but very large areas of the world will become less suitable for humans. Central South America, Central Africa, India, and South Asia will regularly experience temperatures that kill people if they go outside. So no one will be able to live outside of air conditioning in those regions. This projection, by the way, is for 2050. So the projection is for 30 years from now on a Pliocene track. And even the southern states of the US will be inhospitable by then. So I have worked with those groups that are studying the Pliocene, and my belief is let's not go there. We really don't want to go to the Pliocene. We want to find our way back to the Holocene, to a favorable climate. So the first example is the resilience of the Holocene. The Holocene is a favorable climate where civilization developed and where people naturally are healthy, happy, and can grow food. And so a reasonable goal is to restore the resilience of the Holocene, a favorable climate. And we can do that by replacing fossil fuel energy with solar, wind, and water electricity, and restoring the biosphere, restoring natural landscapes that both improve water quality, control floods, and actually improve climate. So brief summary of the example: we want to restore the resilience of a favorable climate. The challenge to the resilience is greenhouse gases. And to do that, we reduce the greenhouse gases and restore the biosphere. I'll give you another brief example. This one is from the Yahara watershed around Madison. It's about 400 square miles, 400,000 people, an urban area surrounded by agriculture. About 10 or 12 years ago, colleagues and I started a project called Yahara 2070 to study changes between 2010 and the year 2070 and ask how changes in land use, climate, and human demand for food, land, and water will affect future generations in the region. We chose 2070 because it's your grandchildren's, it's our grandchildren's generation, and we could imagine that. I'm not going to go through the results in detail. We developed stories of the future by simply talking to residents and learning their views and writing stories about it. We had an artist who illustrated the stories. And after all the stories were developed, we wrote computer models to estimate changes in land and water and air that were biophysically likely to occur within those stories. And the main thing we learned was that we should, if we want if we want to restore what people want, which is good water quality and low risk of floods, we need to restore more natural land in the Yahara region. So currently 19% of the Yahara is natural land cover. And we estimated that that needs to be 35 to 50%. So we need to move the region toward 1/3 to 1/2 natural land cover in order to meet the goals that people have for living there. I'm now going to move to the driftless. There's a recent study of topsoil loss in the Corn Belt has just been published, and the Corn Belt is the ancestral tall grass prairie, and there has been considerable topsoil loss due to farming practices that promote wind and water erosion. And the if you can see the map, see my cursor, the dark red colored area actually is very similar to the area that Abby showed, the area of MVC restored lands. And on average, those lands have lost up to half of their topsoil, the A horizon, the rich or the nutrient-rich, organic-rich soil that determines the productivity of land. So it's extremely critical that MVC is restoring land in this region that has been damaged so much by erosion in recent years. In Yahara, we've seen that it's rain more than wind erosion that is driving the loss of topsoil. And we have also found that expanded cover of native vegetation conserves soil, slows floods, and improves water quality. So this is the upper slide is a cornfield runoff from a cornfield when the corn is young, a familiar site in at least in Dane County. And the two lower photographs show the Blue River going through our land in flood, and then later after the flood subsides and the vegetation is intact. Expanding the area of prairies, wetlands, and forests stores carbon and restores the atmosphere. The carbon is in the soil and in the roots. And as you know, most people know, the roots, the weight of the roots is greater than the weight of the above ground parts for most prairie plants, and the same is true of trees. And so vegetation that is deeply rooted and holds the soil builds the health of the land and also stores carbon and improves the atmosphere. So natural lands, we want to build resilience of natural lands to development. And the way to do that, of course, is to support conservation organizations like MVC and conserve more land, and also recognize that clean water, flood control, and favorable climate are crops. So even though our land looks green and healthy all year round, we are farmers. We're farmers who grow clean water, and we grow flood control, and we grow a favorable climate. And conservation landowners should be rewarded for those contributions to everybody. The heart of it all is natural vegetation cover. It builds resilience of the whole system, climate, soil, and water. And having explained those general points about resilience, I'm going to hand it over to Susan, who's going to talk more specifically about things we and many others have done to improve the resilience of our land. So Susan, over to you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for all of you for being here, and thank you for all that you do. I'm just going to kind of zoom in on the driftless area now and on the land that you've heard a little bit about now from both Abby and Steve. So in the driftless area, this is within the Snow Bottom Natural Area Project boundaries in Grant County, just on the eastern edge of Grant County. And we are now caring for 105 acres on the Blue River at Bluff Road, north of Montfort. I want to just say at the outset that each of my slides, I have just a few, will recognize partners and organizations and people who we've worked with and who we could not do this work without. And particularly, I want to mention Jim and Rose Syme, part of this property. They had purchased and cared for before we owned it, and we have been just lucky to learn from them and work side by side with them. And so grateful for all that they have done, not just in this land, but throughout the Snow Bottom Natural Area Project. So you can see this land is quite varied. There are bluffs, floodplain, the river here, the Blue River runs through 2/3 of a mile. And so there's a lot of variety, a lot of learning opportunities, and a lot of work to be done, as I'm sure many of you share. As Abby said, we have Jim and Rose and us put conservation easements on the property, but I'll show you a little bit more about just the land work itself. We bought our first property about 20 years ago, and at the time, the 1/3 of a mile of trout stream was covered with box elder trees, shading the stream, shading vegetation that would normally be growing there that would hold the stream bank. And it was a much better idea to remove those trees and have better vegetation in place on those banks. So this was a big project, but you'll see that there was even bigger things to come. With the help of Trout Unlimited and a huge effort of the chapter in the Southwest, the Harry and Laura Knorr chapter, we cut down all those trees with their help, of course, and burned. You can see burn piles here, stacked wood, all the stumps along the river. So now the riverside is clear and vegetation was able to rebound. We did some planting, some seeding there, but for the most part, this was regenerated simply by releasing from shade. And then a few years later, we did there was a much more extensive project, again, in partnership with Trout Unlimited and with NRCS, and with Dave Rowe Excavating, who actually does the artwork with the rock and with the grading. So we had some situations here with cut bank erosion and slumping. The rock was brought in from a quarry that's about a mile down the road, if that. So here are the rock piles along the road. The soil was tapered back, and you can kind of get a sense for that here, where you don't have a steep banks now. It's all tapered back, and that soil, which hundreds of dump trucks worth, was graded on this property in a different place, so that it's now growing vegetation in that area. Then we seeded. Here's Jim with his tractor, some hand broadcast seeding, and then Jake Plemer here has a spray, and spreader, wearing a spreader there. And this was also mulched. So you can see this is all happening in the fall of the year. We had early in September, just the beginnings of that. And then by the end of September, it was already done. And so this was all seeded. Of course, in this area, it's disturbed, but there's a lot of plants within the soils and able to make a rebound. So here it is the next spring. The cover crop helps. The vegetation coming back just naturally helps. Lots of seeds germinating, and you can see the tapered nature of it there. And then later, so this is 12 months after the restoration, you have a scene like this. And we have seen, as Abby mentioned, great resilience of this land in flood events. This flood here, taken from the bridge, it shows basically a lake across the floodplain there. This was actually before the project was done that I just described. And that's probably one of the largest floods that we've seen there. This is another water receding flood back in 2013. So this is several years after the project. And we have vegetation here you can see is all plowed down. But depending on the time of year that the flood happens, the taller vegetation may be flattened. It's not killed, but it's just flattened for that time. And the shorter vegetation is usually not flattened at all. The water just runs through it and it just remains there as the river goes back down into its bank. I have a Snapshot Wisconsin camera on the property, so I was surprised here. A deer triggered it. This is in 2017. It had been raining all night. I could see that on the camera. But here was the river flowing 40 yards out of its bank is where the camera is situated. And so this deer was coming down and was probably pretty surprised to see the water there. 2.5 hours later, another deer triggers it, or maybe the same one, and the river has receded. And you can see the floodplain here looks pretty similar, I'm sure, very soggy. A lot of the restoration practices that we use and all of you use, and we all use them in different places and timings and with different intensities, are important for maintaining that native vegetation that's so important for resilience. So prescribed fire, this was our fire last spring. Removing invasive plants and brushing. This is a huge pile of, that's our complete pile of yellow parsnip that we removed. This will be burned. And then also an important piece for learning about the land and learning how you're doing with restoration and how you're doing with maintaining resilience is monitoring plants, birds, insects, land snails. These are just some examples of surveys and monitoring that's been done on our land, fish, water quality. So there have been opportunities for students. There have been professionals who have been doing some of these surveys, and it's all been very helpful. And then one of my favorite ones, and I'll just put a pitch in for this since we're about to see the bumblebees emerging for the spring, is to document them with photography. So all of these pictures are taken on our land with when I was doing bumblebee surveys. And so you can see only 2 of them are bumblebees. And you can, once you have habitat like this, and you can spend a lot of wonderful time there learning which creatures are there, a lot about their life cycles, a lot about what resources they're using. I recommend the Wisconsin DNR project, the Bumblebee Brigade. You could sign up for it today and learn a lot right online, and then you'll be ready in about 2 weeks or so, hopefully, when the first bumblebees are coming out. So just to summarize kind of what Steve and I have been talking about, we want to restore the biosphere to restore favorable climate and clean water, and the ancestral or native vegetation of Wisconsin builds this resilience to exotic native or exotic invasive plants and to the increasing floods and wind by holding the soil in place. And it builds the resilience of the climate by storing carbon. And of course, I hope that I know that everyone here is inspired and interested and active in this work. And I hope that everyone will have a chance very soon to be on a field trip in the spring. So with that, we have these references here. If you'd like to take a screenshot of that or a picture, these are some of the things that might be helpful, and we'll be glad to answer a couple of questions if we have time. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve and Susan. This is Sarah, and I'm just looking at I'm looking for any questions that might have been typed into the chat window here. And we could also, if someone is more comfortable. Oh, here's a question from Rob Tisser. I'm sorry, Rob Tisher. He's asking, are there any future plans for your property?
Susan, do you want that?
Always. Sure. Yes, I mean, we think, all of us are familiar with this. You're always walking around, looking at what's going on. There might be, we did have one area of the stream restoration, which during a flood was damaged somewhat. And we were able to do that as a repair on the original permit with adding, Dave Rowe did a repair on that. Otherwise, I think, watching for invasive species, we don't have, I think the main thing is just to keep moving around the land and learning and seeing what is the next thing to do and knowing when your efforts will make the most difference too. Pretty soon we've got garlic mustard coming up. And so we don't have a lot of it, but we have scattered. And so we do put a lot of work into that, or the parsnip, get that before it seeds. Watch when the floods come, seeds get spread over the floodplain. So watch those margins for things that have been brought from upstream. And then the other thing is just talk with people. And we have a lot of people who are interested in visiting. A lot of fishermen come through, neighbors who are interested in what is going on there and how they can, how they might be able, they see something they really like, they want to put that in their land too. So yeah, just a lot of community and communication.
Susan, I got a question for somebody. If you could hear me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Sure can.
I don't know who it applies to, but Abbey Church there mentioned before about the stars, especially in Grant County, and what they meant and how to get to them. I was trying to I'd like to get more information in regard to that from somebody.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, one thing you can do is visit our website, MississippiValleyConservancy.org. And at the very top of the screen, there's a button that says Nature Preserves. And there you will find descriptions and downloadable maps and trail maps and driving directions for all of the public preserves that we protect.
Okay, I'll try to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. There's some more good questions on here. Someone's asking, what is the time frame for sequestering carbon into the soil in a new prairie?
I can take that one. The land starts to heal very soon, within a year or two of planting the prairie, but of course those deep-rooted plants take some time to develop. The prairies that Susan was talking about are about 20 years old and doing a real good job of sequestering carbon. And it's a long game. You're playing a long game when you restore land. I'm surprised every year by something new that pops up on the land, and it's usually a good thing. Occasionally it's a surprise that I need to go kill, but it's usually a good thing. And so the main thing is just get started, and it'll just get better and better as time goes on.
Great. Before I give you the next question, Susan, I'm going to ask if you would unshare your screen now.
Sure.
And that way we can see you both while you're talking to us. Here's another question. What groups partnered with you for the more formal surveys?
We were lucky through being involved with the DNR. They had a couple of professional bird surveys done there. So that's really interesting, done periodically, so you can see if there's changes or just what the variation of the birds are. And they found birds that we had never seen, of course. And then we had a few species that we had seen that didn't happen to show up on the survey. So you're just kind of building knowledge along the way. And then the UW La Crosse, I think it was Abby who connected us with a professor there, brought her students out, and they did a whole survey of different sites around that bluff, north facing, east facing, etc. And they were surveying for macro and micro land snails. So they did a analysis of that. They looked at all the snails under the microscope, and they found 2 species of endangered land snails that are about 1 millimeter long. And then the cherrystone drop snail, which is also a Pleistocene relic species. So on these north-facing slopes, sometimes you have a Pleistocene component of plants, or in this case, animals. So that was super interesting, because I don't know how many of us are ever even know to look for land snails, and especially microscopic ones within the soil. So they did a study of the diversity and which species were found in all those different habitats around the bluff. That was an educational thing. And then the UW Platteville students have done the fish surveys and the water quality, also done by elementary students or middle school students from Iowa Grant schools. So it's partly connection there was the Trout Unlimited chapter as well. So a lot of times we love our land because we love to be there and it's kind of quiet, and we're working just steadily alone on it, but it's never alone. There's so many other things to bring in and so many other people. And again, I just want to give another acknowledgement to Jim and Rose I know a lot of you have probably learned so much from them as well.
Here's another one for you, Susan. How many species of bumblebees use your property? And have you considered removing honeybees to benefit the bumblebees and other native species dependent on flower resources?
Yeah, I have documented, I think it's 10 species of bumblebees on our land, but of course, they fly. So, and that's a pretty good, southern Wisconsin, we could expect maybe a total, if we saw every possible one, maybe 12 would be the top amount. That's the highest number I know for any site that I've ever surveyed. But it's a good number. It's a good diversity number, and you do need to get pictures of them so you can really learn to ID them. As far as the honeybees go, we do have honeybees on our land. I see them occasionally because there are some hives. I think there were some hives up the hill. I'm not sure if there are anymore. We also had feral honeybees, like one huge white pine that had a feral colony for years. I don't think it's active anymore, but we don't encourage hives, of course. We have a lot of other native bees. There's 400 or 500 kinds of native bees in Wisconsin, so a lot of those are also living here. And so we're not going to place hives. I'm not going to encourage that on the property at all. And there are some people who like to have beehives, and it's good habitat for honeybees too, but we don't see a lot of honeybees in that area. That's the feral ones, I think, are mostly what I was seeing. It was a huge colony.
Okay, here's another one. This person admits that their question might be weird, but what are your thoughts on edible insects? A possible sustainable protein source in 2050?
There's a lot of experimentation going on because food production is our most polluting industry. So essentially all of the water pollution in the world is caused by agriculture, and agriculture is among industries, agriculture is the biggest contributor to global warming. So there's a lot of work going on now around the world to find edible protein sources that may be more efficient than growing cows and chickens and that sort of thing. And these would be done in the protein production is done in controlled facilities. It's like a giant bug coop. And I've eaten the cakes, and they're flavored and seasoned to taste like meat. It's perfectly reasonable. If you've traveled in Africa, you've probably been offered mopane worms on the street. You can just pick them up from street vendors, and they taste perfectly fine as long as you don't realize you're eating a 5-inch grub. You just pop them in. They're crispy on the outside, soft on the inside. So it could help provide human protein in a more efficient way, but we're in an early experimental stage. I don't think it's going to be efficient to go run around MVC prairies eating bumblebees. That's not a winner.
Roz wants to know, what pollinator plants are really good to attract bumblebees? And is there a difference in needs between different bumblebee species?
That's a great question. Well, I can, on the references, if you have that quick link that was at the bottom, and perhaps that we could share that page with you, Sarah, and you could send it out if you like.
Sure.
That has a link to a reference, a reference list that I've created. So it has some forest, it has some climate adaptation references, but also it has a lot of pollinator gardening and that kind of thing. So what I generally tell people for just a real quick list of good plants for bumblebees, I ask people to go to the Rusty Patch Bumblebee website, Fish and Wildlife Service maintains, and there's a plant list link there. We created that plant list to, it's like the Rusty Patch Bumblebee favorites, and their sequence of blooming throughout the season, because that's very important for bumblebees. So when you're planning your pollinator garden, as someone was mentioning earlier, you want to have something bloom, you have things blooming all the time. So Rusty Patch Bumblebee is not a very, from what we know so far, is not a very picky bumblebee. It's not a very different bumblebee from the others. So if you grow that list, you're going to bring in a lot of other bumblebees as well as Rusty Patch, and a lot of other pollinators and insects as well. So that's what I'd recommend right away. The different bumblebees do have different visitation. Some of them do have very different visitation, partly based on the time of year that particular species is active. Some are active more early in the season, others later. And some of them just, I don't really know why, but they are distinct. They'll be more visiting a certain group of flowers, whereas at the same time, the other species will be visiting something else. And we're just really looking at that now in more detail with these photographs where you've got the bee on the flower. And so that constitutes the record. And you can compare you can list the plants and you can list the bees, and you can see where the connections are. And one very intriguing result we found out from a analysis of one of those sets was that we had like 20 some plants and 12 kinds of bumblebees. And there were lots of interactions that you'd expect. A kind of the system was really well networked. But there was one plant that was pretty common, and it had only one bumblebee species visiting it. Luckily it was a pretty common bumblebee, because the plant was common milkweed. And all the other plants had multiple bumblebees, and all the bumblebees had multiple plants, but just common milkweed had only that one. I've seen other species on common milkweed, so that's not a strict rule, but it was very intriguing because it's kind of opens the question of like, oh, wait, that is a very important link then for to look into more and to see, because milkweed, of course, is going to be key for monarchs and on down the line. So these connections just keep building out, and you can see that in action. So Bumblebee Brigade, you can learn a lot from it, and you can contribute a lot too. And it's really helpful. We're looking at that. I'm just doing some plant IDs for it so that we can look at that more carefully.
Fantastic. We probably have time for one more question, and it's a big one. Get ready, Steve. I believe something like 40 gigaton of carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere yearly. Can you put this into perspective by estimating how much carbon we can hope prairies and other natural systems can absorb?
solving the climate problem has several pieces. One of them is to emit less, and the world is moving toward a carbon tax. We're getting closer and closer to that happening. And in fact, the heads of the central banks of all the major countries are beginning to realize that the most valuable mineral on Earth is carbon in the soil. So the purpose of a central bank is to stabilize the currency of a country. And if civilization collapses, then the currencies collapse and the central banks have failed. So people are beginning to talk about actually switching from the gold standard to the soil carbon standard. That may be a long way out, but we'll see a carbon tax soon. And we may also see a carbon kickback to landowners who are storing carbon. So that it would be something like the CRP program, only for carbon, that MVC landowners could take advantage of. But if we're going to solve the climate problem, we're going to have to burn less fossil carbon, and that means replacing that with wind and solar electricity.
Thank you. Carol, shall we go on to the next thing on the program?
Yes, so first of all, thank you, Steve and Susan. That was absolutely a wonderful, informative, and eye-opening presentation. We really appreciate your time, and we appreciate all that you are doing, not just on your land, but really for everybody in learning about the climate, and also Susan, especially your work with bees is always so very interesting, and I get to listen to you on WPR once in a while and enjoy that a great deal as well. So thank you for your leadership in conservation. We appreciate it. Now we are going to go ahead and finish up, and we have our awards next. So if you've been at our member meeting in the past, you know that we do awards. And let's see, I need to shrink this here. Okay. So I want to start with thanking everybody who helps us all during the year. There's no way we could do the work that we do during the year if we didn't have a lot of volunteer help in many different areas. And as the slide says, you don't have to have sturdy boots or a chainsaw to volunteer for the wild. There's something for everyone, from habitat restoration to mapping, event support, graphic design, writing and editing, proofreading, easement monitoring, photography, videography, and office support. So please join me in thanking these 5 volunteers who did so much for us in 2020. The Outreach and Education Volunteer of the Year, Caleb Gilboy. Caleb responded to a social media post that we had put out in search of a volunteer videographer. Due to the pandemic, as you all know, our guided hikes had to be canceled, and we needed to have new ways to engage people with nature. He knew that who we were because he actually lives on the northern edge of New Hampshire grasslands, and he had seen our name on the signs there. Caleb had recently earned a bachelor's degree in film and media studies from Arizona State University, and he was itching to apply his growing skills to an exciting project. He donated countless hours, days and nights of his time to filming and editing a 2-part video tour of our Kickapoo Caverns that has been viewed by nearly 3,000 people on our YouTube channel where it lives today. He said the project was even more fun than I had expected because I got to go into the cave. So congratulations and thank you so much, Caleb. He did a great deal for us this past year and we really appreciate it. Next, we have our Conservation Volunteer of the Year, Ben Johnston. Ben is a map guy, a program associate. As program associate for the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, Ben has been a key player from the start in our Kickapoo Bird Habitat Initiative, making maps to help organize efforts to preserve and restore key bird habitat along the Kickapoo River. He has spent an unbelievable amount of time working on the project using GIS mapping software. Ben has created nearly 100 essential maps illustrating land cover, habitat, land ownership, and bird survey points. We're trying to tap into the idea that people can do more for birds, says Ben. Actually, I'm selfish. There are a lot of good birders out there. Ben says he learns a lot from being in the field with them. The Kickapoo Bird Habitat Initiative is a partnership among the Conservancy, Kickapoo Valley Reserve, Wisconsin DNR, and Valley Stewardship Network with a grant from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And I'd just like to remind you to please mute your microphones so we don't have background noise. And then our Land Stewardship Volunteer of the Year, Ken Cornish. Back in 2017, Ken Cornish saw a request from the Conservancy looking for volunteers to give tours of Kickapoo Caverns in Crawford County. He thought it would be a good way to use his Master Naturalist designation and was soon well versed on caves and bats. In 2019, he volunteered to be site steward for the entire Kickapoo Caverns property. If you had asked me about it 20 years ago, this is not what I thought I'd be doing, laughs Ken, a retired chief financial officer for rural hospitals. As site steward, Ken keeps an eye on the property, maintains the locks and gates, and monitors the field cameras for wildlife and trespassers. He works tirelessly on eradication of invasive species and assists the Conservancy work crews in habitat restoration. Ken is quick to point out the personal benefits of being a site steward at Kickapoo Caverns. Sometimes I go and just walk the land to get to know it. I enjoy the solitude. Thank you so much, Ken. He has put in countless hours on this property and we really appreciate him. Our Special Expertise Volunteer of the Year, Carol Kratz, a monitored pilot. Carol Kratz is an avid hiker, devoted traveler, and physician assistant for Mayo Clinic Health Systems. She is a 20-year Mississippi Valley Conservancy member who does her volunteer work from the air. As owner with her husband, Drake Hokinson, of a single-engine Cessna, Carol conducts the navigating and flying portion of annual easement monitoring for a chunk of the 110 properties that the Conservancy monitors every year. Meanwhile, Drake takes the photographs of each property and does the paperwork. In 2020, Carol monitored 14 properties from the air, covering most of the 9-county region on 2 long flights, saving the Conservancy staff time and fuel. The driftless region is a beautiful part of the country, says Carol, and it is a privilege to see it from the air while doing some useful work. Thank you, Carol. We appreciate your very unique skills so much, and they do save us a lot of time and money. Our Lifetime Achievement Volunteers of the Year, Donald and Barbara Frank. Don and Barbara Frank were here at the inception of Mississippi Valley Conservancy, and their devotion has not dimmed over the following 24 years. They were leaders in protecting the La Crosse Blufflands by donating Barbara's family land that remains part of the city's beautiful scenery and wildlife habitat today. Barbara is a founding board member of the Conservancy, and both she and Don have served multiple board terms and continue as emeritus and emerita board members. They continue to volunteer and provide financial support as well. Throughout the years, Don's background in business has helped the Conservancy keep its eyes on good management and financial practices, while Barbara's leadership on the National Sierra Club board brought a continent-wide perspective to regional conservation issues. Both have long been committed to the serving of the community through support of the environment, the arts, and healthcare. It's easy to jump on these wagons, says Barbara, or help pull them. And it has been truly a personal honor to get to know Donald and Barbara over the years. They have been very supportive of the Conservancy and of me personally, and I want to give my deepest gratitude to both of you. Well, we thank all of these outstanding volunteers, and again, we could not do it without them. So thank you all who have volunteered, not only this year, but for many, many years. And we encourage, if you're interested in learning about volunteer opportunities, visit our website. You can sign up there and you can let us know there what it is you'd like to help out with. And at this time, I'm going to introduce our board president, Sue Dillenbeck. Sue is going to join me in thanking you for attending today, and she's going to wrap up our meeting this morning. So thank you all. Here is board president, Sue Dillenbeck.
As the very least interesting speaker today, I'll be really brief. But I do want to thank you all for being here. I was a little torn this morning. I'm so tired of Zooms. And I so wanted to make cinnamon rolls for the annual meeting. But it was really fun to look at all the faces. As the Carpenters were speaking, you guys were pretty rapt. This has been way better than I'd hoped for. So thank you so much for attending, and we so appreciate you. Thanks to the Carpenters, I learned an enormous amount today. As a person without a conservation background, I learned something at every single meeting I attend, and I'm grateful for that. I am also grateful for the MVC staff. You guys are amazing. And I think I tell you that all the time, and I hope you know I really mean it. Let's see. Also to our award winners, Caleb, Ben, Ken, Carol, and Don and Barb Frank. As Carol said, we can't do it without volunteers. So everybody from the board to the people with their boots on the ground here, to the people who know how to do technical things that I have no clue about, the staff, the board, and everybody else involved with MVC is incredibly grateful. So once again, thank you. That is pretty much all I've got to say. And next year, I'm sincerely hoping to be baking cinnamon rolls again.
Thank you, Sue, and we'll be happy to consume them at our member meeting next year in person, when we can all bake something and come together and have coffee and conversation. Thank you all so much for taking the time today. I know after a while Zoom can get a little bit tiring, but we have to look at those silver linings. And one of them was a lot of you just wouldn't have been able to make the drive. Some of you are Zooming in today from states very far away. And so we're really thankful that so many could join us today. Go out, have a good day, enjoy the nice slow rain that's going to benefit all of those plants that are popping up from the ground right now. Again, my appreciation to all of you. Have a good day.
Hi, Bobby and